This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, more automakers are adopting Tesla's NACS, but there is some pushback. Chevy Blazer EV production starts, Rivian smashes their Q2 delivery expectations, and more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 159 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. Before I get to anything in this podcast, I want to wish all of you a very happy July 4th if you happen to celebrate. And if you're British, well, let's just say we're celebrating a deep and long-lasting friendship between our two countries, and maybe we can just look past all the ruckus from a few hundred years ago. For me, because I have the day off from my day job, I'm actually going to be able to get to the news this week like I intended to record Sunday morning. I think I have a problem with always thinking I can get done more in an amount of time than I can actually really get done. Take today, for example. It's a little bit after 6 p.m. when I'm starting to record this, and I thought I'd have it finished this morning at 11 a.m., although, admittedly, I have been working on the script for a good 2 hours, a little bit more than that at this point. So, oh well. I am going to get it recorded and published today, and we'll see what time it is when I'm done recording. But I am super excited to cover the news this week. I've got a shorter news bit for you, but they are the most important stories in the EV world recently, and you don't want to miss this. Oh, and before I forget, make sure you listen all the way through this entire episode for a special little something at the end. Okay, let's start with Rivian, shall we? The electric truck and SUV startup released their delivery numbers for Q2 and absolutely killed it. They reported 12,640 vehicle deliveries, beating analyst expectations of 11,000 vehicles. And with this latest number, Rivian has reaffirmed their projection to deliver 50,000 R1T and R1S units by the end of the year. And I know some of you are pointing out that Tesla also published their delivery numbers, and they had hit 466,140 vehicles in Q2. And as a result, one can automatically assume that Tesla is so much better. And if you compare them to they are as today, Rivian and Tesla, then yes, Tesla did deliver quite a bit more. But if you go back and look at the start for Tesla, it's worth considering that they only delivered about 1,500 vehicles in their first 34 months of production, while Rivian at this point has only had about 18 months since the start of their deliveries. And even if you look at the first 2 years combined, 2012 and 2013, for the Tesla Model S, Tesla only delivered a bit more than 29,000 units in those years combined. So let's celebrate the awesome success that the Rivian team has made and wish them all the best going forward. Next, VW's EV sales were lower than expected, and the company says it's partly because of, quote, strong customer reluctance, end quote. They say that reduced subsidies in Europe for EVs and high inflation have affected EV buyers, and there may be some truth to that. But also, if people won't buy EVs without the help from the government, maybe the vehicles are just priced too high. And if they're priced too high because they're expensive to build, I mean, you can see where I'm going with this. Honestly, it may be a simple answer to just build less expensive cars better, and then you'll sell more cars. And sure, that's easy for me to say. It's definitely not an easy thing, but we shouldn't need subsidies to sell EVs. We just need automakers to stop relying on their customers getting subsidies in order to sell EVs. Take away the subsidies, and you'll force automakers to actually compete for the business, which drives innovation and requires competitive pricing. That's overly simplistic, and I know very difficult to actually apply in real-world scenarios when you take all of the variables into account, but there's got to be a better way than just complaining that people don't want to buy your cars because they're too expensive. Now, I've been talking a lot about Tesla's NACS connector over the last number of podcasts, and with good reason. It's easily one of the most influential changes in the automotive industry since the introduction of the affordable mass-produced electric vehicle, at least for here in North America. And that's because of all of the benefits adopting the standard will bring, or at least we all think that it will bring benefits. And things have been moving very, very quickly, with new automakers announcing their adoption for the connector type, like Rivian, Volvo, Polestar. Soon, I am expecting Volkswagen as well, if I'm reading things correctly. But there are a few groups that feel that things are moving too fast, and they are hoping that they can have a little bit more time before the connector type is mandated by some state governments, like we saw with Texas and Washington. The group in question is specifically 4 electric vehicle charging companies: ChargePoint, ABB, FreeWire, EV Box, and Flow, and that would be 5, I can't count. They are joined by the Texas Department of Transportation in writing a letter of complaint to the Texas Transportation Commission, calling for more time to test the NACS connector before the state requires it to be included on charging equipment. And if their request is genuine and they just need a little bit more time, well, okay then. But I haven't seen any date on when that mandate is going to go into effect. And what I have found says that the mandate is only applied to EV charging stations that are federally funded. So all of those companies could put whatever connector they want on their charging stations. They just wouldn't have access to any federal money unless they included the NACS connector. So I'm not going to cry for them at this point. And yes, federal funding is very important to building out the EV charging infrastructure, especially currently in the early days where utilization of chargers is going to be lower. But still, there is going to be enough business with just CCS vehicles for a considerable amount of time. A recent poll is out from the Pew Research Center showing that the majority of Americans oppose Biden's plans to phase out traditional gas-powered vehicles by 2035. According to the survey, 59% of Americans are opposed to that plan. Unsurprisingly, the opposition is largely separated by the political party one happens to claim as their team. The red team is opposed to the phase-out of gas-powered vehicles by a margin of 84% to 16%, while the blue team is actually in favor of the plan by a margin of 64% to 35% opposed. In April, the White House said, quote, "Car and truck manufacturers have made clear that the future of transportation is electric. The market is moving, and as a car enthusiast and self-proclaimed car guy, President Biden is seizing the moment," end quote. And while you might assume that those opposed are against EVs themselves, and certainly there are a few people that believe that, that's the way they feel about it, but the real issue here is, as Myron Ebel, the director of the Competitive Enterprise Institute Center for Energy and Environment, put it, quote, "The Biden administration is trying to bend every federal rule they can find to force people into buying EVs. There is still a market that allows drivers to buy the vehicles of their choice, but government coercion is rapidly limiting those choices," end quote. So the issue, as it would seem, is limiting freedom of choice. And generally, I agree that we should be free to choose whatever we want. But there have to be limits to that freedom when it affects other people, especially in negative ways. We do not live as individuals, but as pieces of a larger community. And guess what? Gas-powered vehicles, or more specifically, the emissions from them, cause injury, sickness, death to other people in our communities and drive up healthcare costs for everybody. So yes, I think you should buy whatever vehicle you want to buy, but operating it in a way that negatively impacts the community around you can and should be mandated. You should not be allowed to poison the air that those around you are breathing. EVs aren't necessarily the only answer, but they currently are the best answer that makes the most sense if we want to have cleaner air, less lung and heart disease, and especially if we want to save a ton of money on our collective healthcare costs. But enough about that. I'm going to hop down from the soapbox. I am not here to rant. I just kind of get into it a little bit because it just hits me so hard because I am not on the red or blue team and generally just focus on what's best for as many people as possible. Yes, there are always winners and losers no matter what, but generally, what's best for as many people as possible is the right path forward, right? All right, GM has started production of the Chevy Blazer EV. The first customer car rolled off the line at the Ramos Arizpe assembly plant in Mexico, signaling the start of production for the SUV. The company is offering 2 variants of the Blazer EV to start, the 2LT and RS trims. The entry-level 1LT and range-topping SS are planned to be available early next year. The Blazer EV is the next vehicle from GM that shares the Ultium motor and battery technology with the likes of the GMC Hummer EV, Silverado EV pickup truck, the Cadillac Lyriq, and it's built on GM's BEV3 platform like the Lyriq, the Equinox EV that is upcoming, and a few other vehicles as well. With prices starting for the 2LT at $47,595, and that's MSRP, not actually what dealers will sell them for, this definitely is being positioned as at a very competitive place in the mid to larger size SUV market. So I hope that it sells well because we need more EVs on the road. Car and Driver has been having some fun calculating how far EVs could go in a 10-hour time frame. While they didn't actually take vehicles out on the road for 10 hours, they did have enough data from previous tests that they can figure it out. They basically looked at their previous 75-mile-an-hour highway tests and also their DC fast charging tests and took all of the data in the results to hypothesize the ratio of charging time compared to driving time over a 10-hour trip. The vehicles that they were working with are the BMW M340i xDrive, which is a plug-in hybrid, the Hyundai Ioniq 6 all-wheel drive, BMW i7 Lucid Air Pure all-wheel drive, Genesis electrified GV70, Kia EV6 GT, Mercedes-Benz EQE, Nissan Ariya, VinFast VF8, the Cadillac Lyriq, Audi Q450 e-tron, Kia Niro EV, GMC Hummer EV, and the Lexus RZ450e. The theoretical test worked like this. They started each vehicle with 100% battery state of charge, drove at a constant 75 miles an hour until the battery state of charge hit 10%. Then they calculated the time to charge from 10% back to 80% and repeated as necessary, going from 80 back to 10, etc., until the hypothetical theoretical test was complete. So after that 10 hours, they compared the time spent driving to the time spent charging. And can you guess what the results would be for those vehicles? As you might imagine, the plug-in hybrid covered the distance, needing, according to them, only spending 0.022 hours to refuel, which is 1.32 minutes. I'm not sure about that result. I think maybe it was a typo, and 0.22 hours, which would be, of course, 13.2 minutes. That is more believable, even because all it's going to do is refill the gas tank. It doesn't need to charge because it's a plug-in hybrid. But moving on to the full EVs, we see at the top of that part of the list, the Ioniq 6, followed closely by the BMW i7 and the Lucid Air, all of them needing to only charge roughly for 1 hour. And the statistics were all rounded together for the sake of their results. The bottom three are the Kia Niro EV, which needed 2.2 hours of charging time, the GMC Hummer EV needing 2.7 hours of charging time, and the Lexus RZ450e needing 3.1 hours. So if you want to go on a road trip in any of these EVs and spend as little time charging over a 10-hour total time frame, go for the Ioniq 6, the BMW i7, or the Lucid Air. They did not test any Teslas, so it'd be interesting to see how those came in. And notably, even the Nissan Ariya only took 1.6 hours of charging time, which over the course of 10 hours, honestly really isn't that bad. It was right there in the middle of the pack. But here's the thing. If you really want to reduce charging times as much as possible, you will never likely charge above that 50% state of charge point. 10 to 50% twice, even though you're stopping again, is going to take less time and less than half the time as charging from 10 to 80% once, even though you're effectively recharging more battery capacity. And I could get lost diving into data and calculating all sorts of things and optimizing road trips and all of that. But those of you who aren't as crazy and technical as I am, I won't bore you with that. Maybe I'll leave that for another day. Okay, so guess what? That is it for the news segment, but I do have the question of the week, the EV Resource Hotline segments, a few announcements coming up, so don't go anywhere. I will be right back after these few short messages.
Hey guys, it's Matt Clausen, your host of the All Automotive Podcast. I've been in the automotive industry for over 30 years. I've owned my own repair shop for the last 15 years. I was going to write a book, but I started this podcast instead. So come join me for my take on vehicle extended service contracts or what to look for when purchasing a used vehicle. Like and subscribe to the All Automotive Podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.
Do you own a business and want to reach EV owners and people interested in electric vehicles? EV Resource is welcoming businesses nationwide, both big and small, to become advertising partners with us across all platforms. The EV Resource podcast, magazine, YouTube videos, social media, and our webpage. For more information, please email Zach at hello@ev-resource.com.
Thanks for sticking around. It is now time for the question of the week, and I just realized while I was putting together the organization of this podcast that while I shared the results of the question from before, I didn't give you all a new question to ponder. My mistake. Sorry about that. So let's restart and get back on track. For this week, because it's summertime and we just talked about EV road trips and people often take road trips for vacation, I want to ask you all to think about taking EVs on longer trips. When traveling on longer trips in an electric vehicle, what would be the most important thing that would impact whether you feel the trip is a success or not? Could it be minimizing the overall time stopped compared to time driving, like Car and Driver did with their test? Minimizing the amount of stops that you take altogether? Going as fast as safely possible while you're driving? Or being as comfortable as possible, or being relaxed and alert, or taking time to stop and just breathe a little bit instead of just going. I want to hear from you what the actual ideal driving experience is on longer trips. And then when you do have to stop, either because the car needs to charge or because you're human and have human needs, what do you prefer to do while you're stopped? Do you take time to relax and stretch and get a break from the driving? Or do you take as little time that is needed to handle business and then hop back in the vehicle and get back on the road? What do you like to do? I will have this question pinned on the EV Resource Patreon page. You can find it in the show notes or at patreon.com/EV Resource. A reminder that you do not have to be a current Patreon supporter in order to participate. This question is something that is open for everyone. And on then to the EV Resource Hotline segment. This is your chance to be featured on the podcast. All you have to do is call in and leave me your EV question, comment, discussion topic. It's super easy to do it. All you need to do is use your smartphone's built-in voice recording software, record your message, and then email that file to me at hello@ev-resource.com. And this week, I have commentary from John in Salisbury about the feeling of being connected to the vehicle and a response to those who might suggest that driving an EV results in feeling less connected to the car. Take it away, John.
Hey, Zach. This is John in Salisbury, Maryland. I wanted to say that I disagree with the idea that there's a disconnect between the car and the driver with an electric vehicle. I don't think the drivetrain, the type of drivetrain, directly affects how connected you feel with the car. In fact, this Spark, I probably feel more connected to this car than any car that I've owned in the past. There's more of an immediate acceleration. There's more of an immediate braking. I can feel what the tires are doing. So I don't necessarily feel like having an EV means that you're going to feel disconnected from the car. I think there's other factors that play a bigger part, such as chassis and suspension design. And being able to adjust the level of regenerative braking, for me, is just as rewarding as shifting gears. The idea that if I want to coast a little bit further, then I can just put it in drive versus putting it in low, to be able to have the car anticipate what I want to do before I actually do it. So, just let my foot off the gas and it's already braking by the time I get my foot onto the brake is really cool. That level of telepathy is something that I wouldn't be able to get in a gas car. So I appreciate that.
And so I agree with you, John, to a point that the powertrain itself doesn't automatically mean that the driving experience feels connected or disconnected. What you mentioned is a great point where chassis and suspension have a lot to do with the feeling of a way the car drives. And as somebody, for myself, who loves driving, at times in a spirited manner, I have to say that driving an EV, if one isn't filled with sound deadening materials, a soft suspension, quiet tires, and all of that, if it's a car that is designed to provide more of an engaging driving experience, it can result in feeling more connected, just like you've pointed out with your experience with the Spark EV. I think traditionally, the driving experience with a manual gearbox and an engine that revs through the power band is an experience that most people think of when they focus on driving not just to get from A to B, like for transportation, but for the experience of itself. And with an EV, naturally, you don't have a manual gearbox or an engine that's making noise. But I'll use an experience that I've had to highlight that an EV can be better when it is an experience that you're looking for, not just transportation. The Arcimoto FUV, the three-wheeled electric vehicle with two motors in the front, it's open cockpit. It's more of a motorcycle / autocycle than it is a car. I mean, it's not a car by any means. It still remains one of my favorite EVs, and nothing else has even come close to as much fun to drive. So what about it makes it such an experience? Well, for me, anyway, the fact that it's open to the environment is a plus. You cannot ignore the relationship of yourself and the vehicle, and then everything and everybody around you like you can when you're behind a steel and glass cage. That, for one, is a very clear difference. But in the Arcimoto, also what I like about it is that you don't have anything driving for you. There's no cruise control, no lane keeping assists, etc. It is not even level 1 autonomous vehicle. It is level 0. And the controls are like a motorcycle with a throttle that you would twist with your right hand. That choice of input also makes it a lot more of an experience. But I have to say that my favorite thing about the Arcimoto is this. I could listen to that sound all day and not once think about the sound of an internal combustion engine. And as far as shifting gears, well, I don't know how I feel about that. I do love driving manual transmission vehicles when I'm driving for fun. Naturally, in stop and go traffic, I'd like to avoid it. But there's something about controlling the vehicle and like commanding the vehicle to do your bidding that really appeals to me much more than just input from your right foot. Now, for the 3.5 years that I owned the Spark EV, I did not miss shifting. And I would also, like you mentioned, John, change the gear selector to go from drive to neutral, which unfortunately you can't do in most EVs easily because they don't have traditional gear levers. And then I would also, like you said, put it back into L for increased regenerative braking strength. But it's definitely not the same as a manual transmission if I sit here and really think about it. So I guess I might not be able to settle this until I drive an EV with a manual transmission or a simulated manual transmission. And as I've mentioned before, if Toyota has their way, I might just get that chance. So thank you for calling in, John. As I promised, I will make sure you get your choice of Hot Wheels EV in the box. And I'm going to continue that for the next few people who send in messages as well until I run out. I actually have, I think, 8 total that I'm giving away, so 7 more. The choices are the Lotus Avaya, Lucid Air, Pininfarina Battista, or Audi RS e-tron GT. These are still in great condition in the box, and honestly, I think they would make good collector's item or a gift to a friend or loved one. So for the rest of you, if you have an EV question, comment, or discussion topic, don't hesitate. Send me your thoughts, and I'd love to feature you in the next episode and send you your choice of Hot Wheels EV. Before I end for this week, I want to thank the members of the EV Resource Patreon family, as always. At the director tier, we have Rajeev Narayan leading the way, joined by Andy Cooper and Ethan B. At the executive producer tier, we have Christopher Lawrence. I do have the potential dates for the July EV Resource Water Cooler Chat posted to the Patreon page, and that is a benefit available to all Patreon supporters, regardless of whether you are on a tier or not. And I look forward to seeing you all later this month for our Zoom chat. I also want to recognize at this point the longest active member of the EV Resource Patreon family, Bruce Ely. Bruce has been supporting EV Resource since June 15th of 2020 and is currently the only patron who has continuously supported my efforts for over 3 years. So I want to thank you, Bruce, for your loyalty and dedication to the mission of accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles through the EV Resource podcast, magazine, and, of course, as I've mentioned before, the now weekly newsletter. I genuinely appreciate the support. And I know I've said it before, but EV Resource wouldn't exist without the support of people like those that are on Patreon. It's kind of like NPR in that way, I guess, though instead of radio, it's listener-supported podcast. My time is absolutely limited, and while I would love to be doing this full time, I cannot afford to do that and give up my regular day job. And sure, maybe at one point it was the dream that if enough of you chipped in, even just for the $5 a month producer tier, it would provide enough for me to be able to do this full time. And so that was a dream, and it might not be the most realistic one, at least at this point it seems like that, but it doesn't hurt to still dream in some way, I guess. For me to actually leave the full-time job and focus on EV Resource full-time, I'd only need about $5,000 a month. So, considering that we're at about $100 a month, actually a little bit less than that, of support on Patreon currently, we only need another 980 people to join the Patreon family at that $5 a month tier, and we're there. So who's next? Okay, I'm joking a little bit, obviously, but there are ways to support EV Resource if committing your hard-earned coffee money isn't your a cup of tea. Okay. I should have thought that one through a little bit more. But if you're not wanting to support directly, and look, I'm perfectly okay with that. There are ways that you can indirectly support my efforts as well, doing the things that you'd be doing anyway. What I offer you all in terms of the content for the magazine, podcast, newsletter, etc., is free and always will be. I'm not going to use subscriptions or a paywall to hide behind, because the information and education and interviews that I do should always be available to everybody, not just those who can pay for it. So as a result, the other ways I've tried to gain some financial traction are by using affiliate connections and partnering with companies for advertising. There are a lot of available options at this point, so instead of listing them all for you here on the podcast, I have everything on the EV Resource webpage under the Sponsors tab. The direct link is actually ev-resource/deals, and the reason it is titled that is because you can find discounts, coupon codes, and other deals that those companies have graciously chosen to extend to all of you. So I encourage you to check it out. If you at any point are going to be purchasing something from those companies anyway, then please make a purchase through the link provided. That way, EV Resource will get a small cut. You'll get what you were getting anyway, and everybody wins. So I encourage you all to please consider supporting those organizations and companies that support the show. Okay, so I am done recording. It is now 6:37, and not bad, actually, under a half hour for the recording part. So I want to thank you all for sticking around and listening to the entire episode. And for that simple effort, I'm actually going to do something very special for you. In addition to the monthly Patreon Zoom hangout, I'm also going to schedule a Zoom chat for everybody to join in. That means you. So if you're interested and you want to participate with that, then send me an email to hello@ev-resource.com. And in the subject line, put EVR chat, all in caps, maybe some stars, something, because that will get my attention. And then I will send you in return the Zoom link with the information for the date and time. And I'll also put up a poll on the Patreon site for possible discussion topics That way, if we have 100 people, it's not a madhouse. So I look forward to seeing all of you. So that'll end it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. So this is future Zach checking in. It is just before 8 o'clock, and I'm finished editing. So a total today of about 4 hours to go ahead and record, edit, plan everything for the podcast. That actually is a little bit faster than I've normally gotten it done. So yeah, this is just for my record keeping, as it were. But those of you who happen to still be listening, now you know the amount of time it takes to record even just a half-hour long podcast.